Hello, and welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. This is Anna, co-founder of the Final Girls and your podcast host. In this episode, we're going to be taking a little detour from our season dedicated to exploring the monstrous feminine to talk about a new and chilling film that has just dropped onto the streaming platform Shudder. I'm joined today by podcast regular and friend of the Final Girls, Becky Dark, to talk about a film that in just under 60 minutes managed to freak us both the fuck out. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking in spoilerific detail from the very beginning about the Zoom horror Host. Becky, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for asking me. Sending over this film last night was a last minute and deeply disturbing experience.
You're welcome. I mean, I feel like it's a true ode to the nature of how fast this film was made. The fact that we both watched the film, texted about it, and managed to arrange this recording and are doing this recording and will publish this podcast in less than 12 hours.
Yes! We're so on brand with Host. This is amazing.
Yeah, I love it. So to kick straight off, and like I mentioned, we're going to go into full spoiler details from the very beginning. So don't hold back. And if anybody who's listening to this hasn't seen Host yet, it's an hour-long horror film. Everyone's got an hour. We spend hours of our days on Zoom. This is probably the best use of Zoom I've ever seen. So to kick off our conversation, Zoom is really out of nowhere taken over our lives in lockdown and beyond. So, for work, for socializing. So what has been your relationship with that particular platform?
Yeah, it's been really weird, and it's kind of gone in peaks and troughs. So when we first entered lockdown and everybody was suddenly panicking that we weren't going to see each other, I suddenly found myself Zooming and having video calls with friends who I've never video called before, even though I have spent longer kind of not seeing them than we were kind of at the beginning of lockdown. But there was just this air of like panic about it, and trying to, I think, instill an element of like, we're all stuck in our houses, we need to reach out, we need to continue to connect and video call. We're so lucky during this pandemic as opposed to ones years and years and years ago, because we've got all of this technology that does mean that we can remain connected. So it was chats and quizzes and watching films together and all of that stuff, and that was quite intense at first. Then it dipped off, and I think people realized that actually we were kind of in this for the long haul, and you just had to get used to the new routine. And I think people kind of got bored of Zoom a bit quickly, so it dropped off a little bit. And now I think it's, for me, taking a bit more of a up, it's like a bit of an upswing again, because I think people have gotten over that initial kind of like fatigue with it, and people are just using it a little bit smarter.
So what did you make of the idea of a horror film made entirely over Zoom?
I thought it was inevitable, really. We've had computer screen horrors and thrillers before. We've had Unfriended, Searching was a really effective thriller, and much more recently, and I know this wasn't kind of done over a video call platform, but Death of a Vlogger, this film Host really reminded me of that kind of using phones and using laptops to explore small flats that were in the dark and that kind of thing. So we've seen it before, but there was definitely, I think, I do think it was inevitable that at some point people were going to use this new situation of us all being very isolated in our own spaces, but also having this constant opportunity for connection over video calls, and that the opportunity that it gives for the kind of frame analysis horror where you're just looking in the background the whole time for a door creaking or a lamp moving or something like that. I'm glad that it's come along as quickly as it has, and I'm glad that it's come along as effectively as it has, because it could have been disappointing, but I wasn't disappointed with this at all.
So tell me, what did you make of Host as a whole?
Scared the shit out of me, Anna. Yeah, I was in bed. I thought like I just finished my tea, and I thought, oh, I know, I love watching these sorts of films on a laptop as they are made, and as it makes it so much more effective. So I put my earphones in. It wasn't dark yet, but it was that sort of twilight time. So it got dark as I was watching the film. And it was about 45 minutes in, and I suddenly realised that I was sitting in the pitch black in my bedroom, and I had to pause the film and call to my husband, who was in another room of the house, and say, would you mind coming and switching on the bedroom light for me? Because I'm too scared to get out of bed in the dark. Like, this was visceral.
Yes. Similarly to you, I watched it kind of at that twilight moment when the sun was going down, and I live by myself, so I was watching it with my good headphones on my big computer on my desktop, and I literally screamed out loud several times, to the point where I think my neighbors got concerned, because it was just that thing with, I forgot that the light was going down, and then again I was in pitch black darkness for the last 15 minutes, and it did that thing where I was like, I can't have this be my full screen right now, it's too freaky. So I had to minimize it and kind of turn the lights on. And it was a lot. And the fact that you're right, the fact that it sort of mimics so well the interface of Zoom makes it so terrifying, because it's like, it literally feels like you're on a Zoom call with your friends, and all of this is going down, and it's pure panic. The single time that I remember feeling so viscerally afraid of my surroundings, where it felt just so everyday horror in a really relatable way, was watching Paranormal Activity kind of in bed. In whenever that came out, and being terrified of just being in my bedroom, because that's where everything was set. But even that had a distance. This was like right there,
and just so current as well. It's not even like we've come out of the pandemic and out of the increased use of video calls, and this was made to kind of look back on it. It's like it's still going on every single day. And you're so right about the interface and stuff, and how well that was used, because even little things like the first thing they all do, or the first thing that two of them say is, oh my God, babe, your hair looks great. Yeah. Like, that's every single time I see one of my friends and I haven't kind of seen them for a while. Oh my God, your hair's gotten so long. Or, oh wow, have you, like, now that the salons have reopened, like, oh my God, you've had it cut. Does it feel amazing? How was, it's little details like that made it feel so authentic. And later on, when one of the characters, I think it's Caroline, is she's sort of with her face, sadly and brutally, is like typing like gibberish into the keyboard, and so the chat notifications keep coming up, and then they just sit there as this little red notification, and even that was giving me anxiety, because I was just like, please will somebody fucking click on that so we can read them, or at least just get rid of the little red guy. Like,
I know. And like, there's a moment as well where sort of, where they're kind of walking around, or when, they shift, or, they connect the laptop or the phone to a power source and kind of the brightness comes back up a little bit, and they're reflected, or when someone mutes themselves to go and pee. It's just all of these small behaviors that we've gotten so used to that increase that level of authenticity. So what did you make about the key characters? Because the basic premise is that 6 friends get together to do a Zoom seance that's sort of being facilitated by a medium who's only in this for the first, I want to say, 5 minutes or so, and kind of then disappears because her connection is bad. which I love. So what did you make about their dynamic?
I thought it was excellent, actually, and I really loved the kind of natural way that they all spoke to each other. And as I understand it, they're friends in real life. And there was such an authentic dynamic between them, the way they greeted each other, the way there were even kind of the awkwardness of that first, when they all first come on, like who's gonna speak. And you know, it is because talking to your friends, even if you've known them for years and years, or you know them really well, over video calls, there is always going to be that disconnect. It's really difficult to make eye contact with each other. There's sometimes that kind of lag where somebody will go to say something and then you think, oh God, I've got to fill the silence. So then you actually go to talk and then you're chatting over each other. And so I thought they captured that really well, and I thought the dynamic between the characters was excellent because you know the film is so short, but in such a short period of time I thought they very effectively made these people that we could connect with. And then, you know, so the fear is so effective because I thought they did a really great job of introducing these characters so quickly.
Yeah, and it's an amazing testament, I think, to the performers as well. The fact that, well, there's two things. The fact that the film doesn't really try to create these over elaborate stories for them. They, you know, because friends in real life wouldn't just start chatting and explaining their past and their motivations over a Zoom call. They just kind of go directly into the action, into the main bit. And what did you make of the performances? Because I don't know about you, I found it kind of amazing that they're able to convey such pathos and also care for each other and also be just absolutely fucking terrifying through basically their relationship with the screen and how they play with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one of the benefits, but also a potential kind of con is that with this sort of film, that camera is just in your face constantly. And you know, they are leaning in a lot because they're trying to see what's happening in the background, or they're kind of leaning forward with anxiety. And I believe this, you know, this sort of kind of desire to try and connect with each other, especially as they're sort of becoming scared for each other's safety. And that kind of scrutiny on an actor's face of such a close up, but also just kind of relentlessness of that camera just constantly pointed at them, can be a con, because it can kind of reveal, you know, flaws and weaknesses, I suppose, in performances. And I was absolutely captivated by it. I was in it, and I think that is a huge testament to the performances, because I wasn't constantly thinking, oh, like, I don't know, like, you know, that was weak, or she fluffed that, or he could have delivered that better, or anything. I just believed it. And I think, you know, that dynamic of them already having existing relationships before making the film must have added to that. But I think for a film of this scale and for actors of their kind of experience, I agree with you. I thought it was really, really impressive.
So let's get into the horror aspects of this, because we've both kind of raved about how scary we found it. I found that it quite smartly used quite a lot of familiar tropes, so found footage movies, but also supernatural and paranormal films, especially the ones that revolve around summoning spirits or seances or Ouija boards and so on. So how do you think the film's use of those tropes was effective?
Yeah, I do. I mean, in terms of effective in creating and crafting effective scares, then yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, it was trope heavy. You know, there's an attic, there's lights going out, lights flickering, glassware smashing, bangs in the background, some, you know, jump scares of things jumping out of the dark towards the end, that now well-worn, but I think always effective trope of the camera flash, you know, to see what's going on.
I love that.
It was so good, especially like leading up to that final scare, even though you know it's coming.
Still work.
I want to come back to the kind of Zoom notifications in terms of the like 10 minutes left and the countdown and stuff. But just sticking to the tropes at the moment, like, you know, all of that stuff is well-worn ground. We've seen it all before. But I think because the medium of the film, of it being done as a Zoom call, was so fresh, for me, it didn't matter that I'd seen those things before, because I thought it was still executed really well. And as I say, I couldn't get out of bed to switch the light on. So,
you know, when there's the skeptic, there's a friend who sort of makes light of the seance. There's the friend who is a lot more invested in it, takes it more personally. You know, even some of the visuals, they remind you of other films, but that doesn't make them any less effective. I think for me, it was mostly the fact that there's such uncinematic settings. The fact that you're kind of forced to look behind the characters or try to see things in a way that doesn't seem so designed in a way, even though it obviously is, you know, it's a well-crafted film. But coming back to your earlier point about kind of the Zoom aesthetics, how do you think the film makes the most out of the limitations and the desktop and the Zoom specific setting?
So I thought that the point that they made about them needing to be more careful because it was being done over Zoom. So the I think is it Salen, the medium. She says that this is her first seance over Zoom, and she says that, you know, that means that they need to be like they're not quite as protected as if they were all together and they were making like a physical circle. And there's a lot of stuff about like visualizing the circle, visualizing them holding hands. They each have a candle instead of having just one. And I thought that was a really nice device, that then when one or two of the characters are kind of disrespecting the process, disrespecting the spirits, that then opens this kind of gateway for the horror that then ensues. So I thought that was a really neat device. And again, like kind of something that you can almost like believe, you know, it's like, yeah. Like it seems like a terrible idea to do a seance over Zoom. Why are you doing this? And then, yeah, in terms of like the notifications and stuff that come up. So there was a great one that pops up 10 minutes from the end of the film. Yes. You have 10 minutes left. And at that point, I was like, oh, God, well, things are really going to start ramping up now then, aren't they? Like, I can't remember the last time a film I was watching literally gave me a countdown to the end of it. And then the minute countdown that flashes up in the top left-hand corner with, like, the little upgrade button, like, upgrade if you want to continue your call. And so it is literally counting down 60 seconds as... I think it's Hayley and Gemma are going through. Hayley's a flat with the Polaroid flash, and so you're like, every time it flashes, you look up to the timer again. Like, is this going to be the time that the jump scare is going to come out? And again, you might be sort of thinking, oh, if there's a countdown to a jump scare, does that make it less effective? No, it bloody doesn't. If anything, it made it more effective, because you're just like, I know it's coming, but it still got me.
I know, same. I almost instinctively went to close down the notification window when it popped up. Which sort of really reinforced this intense identification with the film, where I was like, fuck it, I'm actually, is it also gonna happen to me? Because I'm just in this apartment by myself watching this damn movie. And what did you think of how they employed the scares and this killer spirit, which we don't really learn anything about? And I love that as well.
Yeah, me too. Because, you know, there's none of this kind of, I don't know, you would usually, in a film like this, get the point where the hero or the protagonist goes and does some research, right? So what happened in this building before, and then you learn the backstory of the evil spirit, the antagonistic spirit that is sort of haunting this space. And of course, they don't have any time for that. So it just just, you know, crashes straight on with the scares and the action with very little exposition at all, which is fab. I thought if I did have a criticism about the film, and it's not really a criticism, it's more of an observation because it's very low budget and they made it in about 12 days. But I thought there were a couple of instances where we could have maybe seen less of the actual spirit. There was one shot, I can't remember exactly who it is. It might be the guy when
Teddy.
he's in the barn, but you get Teddy, thank you, but you get a flash of it, and it kind of looked a bit like the first Slayer from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but it was very quick, but I sort of thought, oh, that brought me out of it a little bit. It looked a little bit ropey. And then the last shot, the big jump scare at the end, again, I just thought I could have maybe seen a little less, but that is, that's a very sort of small observation in what otherwise I thought was done absolutely brilliantly in terms of the scares.
You see, that's interesting that you mention it, because I started making up a whole story in my head about why we started seeing the spirit in more detail.
Oh wow!
Because like, it was very, we didn't see anything in the first couple of kills, and then we see this sort of like first Slayer-esque sort of messy but already corporeal spirit, and then with the final one we actually see it bloodied faced and very up close. And I was like, because I think our instinctive reaction with this sort of unexplained phenomena is to try to rationalize it and to try to make up a reason for it. And without the film giving us kind of any exposition or backstory, which I also love because it just forces me to imagine one. I started thinking, it's like, oh, is it that the more that it kills, the more strength it gathers so it can actually materialize? And I don't know if that was the filmmaker's intention, but just the idea of having me create this reasoning for the spirit materializing more made it it was already a pretty active experience watching it, but it just made it much more so intense because I started creating a whole narrative for it to essentially explain the shifting appearance of the spirit, which had gone from sort of flash images or completely invisible to being a physical manifestation that can also actually get blood on itself, because it didn't have that before Teddy, I think.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah, that's amazing. And you're right. I guess I kind of actually hadn't thought of it as a progression, because you're right. At first, it's very much kind of classic poltergeist stuff. Lights flashing, chairs sort of being dragged around the room, cupboards being opened, that kind of stuff. Then you kind of go to Emma and like the filters and the mask.
Oh my god. Never using a fucking filter
and
again.
Then. Mate, honestly, oh god, it's just so every day. Like it literally has made me consider so many of my actions, even over the last sort of 12 hours since I watched it. Ridiculous. And then so you get the brilliant bit with the flower on the floor, which again was very sort of paranormal activity. And then the sheet over it, etc. So I hadn't kind of thought of it as that kind of progression. I absolutely love it now you've pointed that out.
Did you have a favorite moment or a favorite scare for you?
I thought that it sounds like psychotic to call this a favorite moment, but I found the bit with Caroline being like smashed into the keyboard was just almost impossible to watch because it was so well done. It was brutal. So I thought that was excellent. And I think I'm just going to say that.
I love that, especially with the intercutting of the loop of her just hanging out in her apartment and being okay. Because then
that was so creepy.
And the fact that the loop kept playing even after she died, so intensely creepy. I know, I loved. I think my favorite was when, and I made I showed you this. My psychotic notes watching the film was just legs with a lot of exclamation marks. Because I love those shots in horror films where the person who's watching doesn't see the scary thing, but we do. And they're sort of oblivious, and then the audience knows a bit more than the protagonist. And I love those moments because I'm terrified. And I think that was the first time where I actually yelled at the screen.
Yeah, and again, it was one of those beautiful fleeting moments where her camera phone pans round, we all see it, she doesn't, pans back and it's gone. Really, really well crafted. And again, like I loved, and I'm sure I kind of shouted out something like "Yes, babe" or something, because that classic thing of like, oh sure, so now it's time to go up in the attic because we've heard some banging up there, and that idea of us all kind of rolling our eyes a little bit, like, why are you doing that? That's a ridiculous decision. And her going halfway up the ladder and then being like, nope, and coming back down. And at that point, I was like, thank you. Like, of course, that is what you would do. You would just be like, no, absolutely not. And she goes and gets the selfie stick and stuff. Yeah. I thought another thing, just sort of following on from that point, that I found very effective about the Zoom was, as Caroline is going around the house looking for her dad, then hears the knocking from upstairs, puts the laptop down, opens the door, etc. The other girls on the call are all saying things like, we're here with you, we're here with you. And of course, they're not. Like, you know, if they were all on the landing with her physically, it's like, we're down here, don't worry, yeah, you go up, but we're right here. And they're saying those comforting things, but obviously because of the pandemic and because of the nature of Zoom and video calls, they're not there. They can watch it happen. And I found that a really interesting, almost like comment on friendship over Zoom, friendship during the pandemic, where we have had that physicality of friendship sort of removed from us, that instinct that we have to just kind of run round to each other, or let's go down the pub, do you want to meet for a coffee, you know, that kind of thing. It's been removed, and the pressures and the complications of trying to maintain support for your friends over things like Zoom. I just thought that was very cleverly done.
Totally. You've kind of answered a question that I was just about to ask you about kind of how do you think this taps into lockdown or COVID anxieties, but I think you really nailed it in that thought. And I think that's also the element that elevates the film for me. So there's a couple of things. On the one hand, it's very easy to just say, oh, this is, you know, this was inevitable. This is the kind of a reaction to, you know, filmmaking being impossible right now, to productions being halted. But I think it's much smarter than just a Zoom gimmick, because it really taps into this idea of the distance friendships, of the lack of human contact, of even the difficulty of a connection or even eye contact. And then also on a more cinematic level, it's really playing around with the idea of the audience, because like you mentioned, when she's about to go up in the attic, her friends are watching her. She's actively being watched by someone, which is what we all do when we're watching horror movies. But in this case, it's a very different type of interaction, because, you know, I might be screaming at the screen, don't fucking go up in the attic, what are you doing? But her friends in the film that I'm watching as well are doing the exact same thing, because they're very familiar with that. It's sort of existing on all of these numerous layers of people watching each other put themselves in danger or be in danger, and being totally unable to do anything about it, which is so, I think, creates such a huge amount of a very specific type of tension where you're invested, you're participating, but you are still alone, and all of the characters are still alone, even though they're constantly in dialogue and in contact with their friends.
Yeah, totally.
So, and on that note, the one moment when we see characters meet in real life and not just on the screen is when Gemma runs over to Hayley's house. What did you make of those? I don't know how long it is, like those last few minutes of the film.
I loved that when she gets there, they like bump elbows and then kind of like laugh about it. There's, you know, there's a lot of it's a very self-aware film, and the characters are also very self-aware, and I really loved the way that comes through, and that little sort of moment where because again, you know, that after having gone through this sort of experience together, the instinct would be to run up and throw your arms around each other, you know, feel each other, you're safe, you're warm, you know, and all they do is kind of bump elbows because the pandemic. And I loved that. I thought that was a lovely little touch. And then there was an element to me at that point, because I think Jenny's saying, let's just get the fuck out of here, you know, let's leave the flat. And there was a little bit of me going, yes, seriously, like, why aren't you leaving the flat? But saying that, you know, you do get that hugely tense kind of finale that I've already sort of spoken about, with the countdown and the flashes and that amazing final scare. Yeah, and I mean, you know, it ends, and I felt completely, you know, just like wrung out, just like, you know, just amazing. Yeah.
To wrap up our conversation about this film, and I think we've been raving about it for about 30 minutes, so I can't imagine another answer to this, but would you recommend people seek it out?
100%, yeah. If you've got Shudder, just get on it. You know, people, even if you're working today, like Anna, you and I are recording this in my lunch break from work, and if we weren't recording this and I'd seen it on Twitter, I'd probably be watching Host right now in my lunch break. It's literally an hour. So yeah, I mean, just immediately get on it. And if you don't have a Shudder subscription, they do free trials. So, you know, fill your boots.
Yeah. Oh God, I love the runtime. I love it. I want more hour-long films.
And hour-long films that have this kind of impact as well. An hour-long film is always a treat, but to cram this much kind of effective tension and fear, that kind of catharsis that you get coming out of a really good, you know, sort of supernatural ghost film or whatever, and to genuinely evoke a lot of the stuff that we're going through at the moment. But because I think what I would have assumed would be, it would almost be too real, like too much like what we're living through at the moment. And, you know, what I want is escapism. So do I really want to watch a film where people are Zooming and it's in the middle of the pandemic? Like, you know, we're going through that every day. But there was, you know, the approach to it and the seance and the characters and the scares and everything managed to lift it above that for me. So I wasn't concentrating on the fact that it was too similar to real life. What I was able to concentrate on were the differences and, you know, how scary they were. So yeah, I mean, yeah, really, really impressed.
Becky, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you again for asking me.
Where can people find out more about your work online?
I am at Bunny Dark on Twitter. My letterboxd is at Becky Dark. And I've got various bits and bobs kind of writing and stuff coming out over the next month or so. So just keep an eye out.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna.
And that's it for this episode of the Final Girls podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you can, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. They really help. And you can find out more about what we do on thefinalgirls.co.uk and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Final Girls UK. You can also follow Becky on Twitter at Bunny Dark, and I tweet a lot of broody memes on Anna B. Demented. Thank you for listening, and we will be back with a new episode tomorrow as part of our regularly scheduled programming with a deep dive into aliens.